Hi, everybody. Say hi. We got both a hi Gordon and a Gordon sucks. I'll let you figure out who was who. So we are going to review two different regions today. First, the Middle East, which is generally this. And we're also going to review India, because tomorrow, for the last review, we're going to tackle China and Japan, and I want to make sure that we leave room for that. So we will do the Middle East and South Asia today. So you guys tell me, what is going on in this period of time in the Middle East and India? Unit 1. So we're talking foundations to 600 River Valley Civ time, right? Who are the River Valley Civs in those regions? All right, Babylon is technically a ruling group within this civilization. Euphrates is the name of the river. So we've got here, I should do that in blue. Good. So we've got here the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Good, James. And the civ that's between them, it literally means between the two rivers, Mesopotamia. Meso is like the middle. So Mesopotamia means between two rivers. That's the civilization we see here. Of those, we have a few notables. First, the Sumerians. And then after the Sumerians, we have like the Assyrians. And then after that, we have the Babylonians. After that, the Akkadians. There's a lot, right? The idea is they continually invade each other. But these were the main two, and we'll talk about them in a second. Who was the other River Valley Civ? Good, the Indus River Valley. What were the two main city-states? There were several, but what were the two main city-states within the Indus River Valley? Excellent. So we have Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. So what's similar right off the bat between these two? Politically, organized.
Organized, and like the center was like the main thing.
How might we describe the political organization? It's kind of like in Greece, too, right? Like, how is this organized? It's not one solid, centralized empire. Right, good, James. They're city-states. I know that's where you, in your head, you're going. They're city-states, right? There's a main location, and within that location, we see different city-states. City-states within Mesopotamia might be things like Akkad, right, Nineveh. So over time, we get more and more of those things. But the two main groups of people are the Sumerians and the Babylonians. So what did the Sumerians contribute to the worlds? They're a lot of things, right? But one of the things is they create the world's first written language, right? There's always been spoken language, but the world's first written language. Does anybody remember what that's called? Cuneiform. Good. You remember like week 1 of school, back when we still had 254 days and not 3? And I was like, one day you're going to look up at the board and it's going to be like 5 days left. And you all just rolled your eyes. This crazy old beard. It's lying again, but now we're here. Good, so we have cuneiform. What else can you guys tell me about the Sumerians? Good. They were eventually wiped out, but so the Sumerians also have some monumental architecture like ziggurats. Why do we call it monumental architecture? There's like two main reasons. One, it's a monument for some religious cause. And then what else does the word monumental mean? Like if this were the SATs. Big, yeah, quite large. They are physically large also, right? They're monumental in size, but also in importance, usually for religious. And like with the Aztec pyramids, they're pyramidal in shape because that brings you higher to the gods, or the heavens where the deities are. Good. The Sumerians had the first written language. They had ziggurats. But the Babylonians, who's a famous Babylonian? Good. Hammurabi. And what did he come up with?
The code.
The Code of Hammurabi, right. What is it? It's not 12, you're thinking Rome, but that, yes, it's written laws. I think I don't know if there were 10 or 8. No, I'm lying, there were like hundreds. There were like 270 something. I'm not sure if I made you read any. It used to be part of the summer work. I don't think I made it part of yours this year. But there were like 270 something different codes. Things like if Kimura steals a light from her teacher, her hand's going to get chopped off, right? Basically an early version of an eye for an eye. But there was also very classist and gender-based. If Jeremiah committed a crime, he might get punished for it. But if Brianna committed the same crime, she might be put to death for it. Right, so there was a lot of, this is where we start to see in the really old world, this is how we have ideas about gender and how that started to form. Social differences too. If Jeremiah hit somebody who was his lesser, he might get a fine. If James hit somebody who was his better, let's say he was a slave and he attacked somebody better on the social scale, he'd be put to death. right? So there were also class differences. And so this was a legal code, and it's important for that. It's also where we start to see written language put to work. But it also gives us an idea about how these early settlements formed, and it's the beginning of social classes and the beginning of gender differences as well. Okay, tell me about Indus Valley then. Who are they? What are they? Tell me about them. How are they similar and or different? Yeah, they came up with something. It wasn't really, I mean, it was kind of sort of religious, but it was also very defense-based. We're talking the monumental architecture for these city-states. Citadels. Sanskrit is actually Aryan. That's the language that the invaders bring when we see the creation of like Hinduism and the India we recognize today. Remember that the Indus Valley peoples are not the same Indians we recognize today. When we see the caste system put in place, the Indus Valley peoples who survived would have been either the untouchables, the Dalit class, all the way on the bottom, or perhaps the Shudra, the peasant class, right? Not the merchants or higher. So you guys got it. Their monumental architecture were citadels. I can draw birds. I don't even know how to draw this. So if this is the city, the citadel was always built on the tallest part. It looked like a giant donut. I'm not kidding. It was round, and it was hollow in the middle, like a giant donut. And the idea was for what? Okay, first we have it for protection. If there were an invasion of the city, you could probably go up there and hide in the citadel. Why else?
What was on the outside?
Not so much storage, interestingly enough.
Was it because weren't the poor on the outside and the rich were there?
Yes. So we have some settlements down here, kind of like the farmers taking care of all of the crops down here. And then, yeah, the rich would live closer to the citadel. But why else is it built on a hill, you think?
Oh, city on it? No.
Marta? Good. There's the religious purpose, too.
I can see that.
James, what was that one?
It's hard to siege up a hill.
Oh,
Yeah, it's hard to siege up a hill, but what other benefit being on a hill?
Was it an example for people to follow? They see it.
Not that. Good. Brianna, they have a good view. It's too obvious. They have a good view of everything. They would be able to see from a distance any invaders. But what was really interesting, perhaps the fatal flaw for the Indus River Valley. I mean, they were all built on floodplains because they were all on.
Floods.
Right. I mean, right. That's one of them. What I was trying to get at is they're all immune to flooding. They're all subjected to flooding. Egypt floods consistently. Meso, the Tigris and Euphrates, flood all the time. So, yeah, they flood. However, something else. What else was a problem for them? They didn't do something that the other city-states in this region... No, they irrigated. They didn't do something that the others did, and it was a problem for them when the invasions came. They did have a military, however... So let's say Meso and Egypt, they used to trade with each other. And Meso used to trade with Indus also, but how was Indus's relationship different? Does anybody remember? That's okay. One of the things that Indus did not do is it did not accept foreign technologies at all. So they would trade for food and whatnot, but they wouldn't bring in new weapons. They wouldn't bring in new technologies, things that they could have armed themselves with. They didn't borrow any technologies or knowledge from the Mesopotamians. So unfortunately for the Indus Valley peoples, who are here, when the Aryans come invading, they really don't have a really solid way of protecting themselves. And so the Indus Valley gets knocked out. We see the rise of Aryan civilization. They bring with them things like Vedic texts and ideas about Hinduism and caste, and all of these things form the modern India we recognize today. Those are the Aryan peoples from the Caucasus Mountains, generally the Indo-Europeans, who invade and take over. Those who survive the invasion are then put at the bottom of society, and then India goes on much in the way we recognize it now. A very Hindu, decentralized thing. Okay, so that's what's happening in Unit 1. I didn't need to erase that. Let's see what's going on in Unit 2. Oh, ruining everything. Yeah, hold on. I'm failing at everything. All right, so we're at Unit 2. What's happening in Unit 2 for the Middle East and for India? What is a big power that forms in the Middle East? I know James knows this, so I want somebody else to answer. Persia. Good. This is when we start to see the rise of the Persians. To this day, you might consider some of the culture of Iran Persian, right? It's very different and unique from like Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Part of that is because Persian culture kind of melded to Shiism when we see the rise of Islam in Unit 3, but Persia, you still hear that word brought up every once in a while. So there's Persia. What's their goal? What do they want out of life? What does everybody in Unit 2 want? Land, right? So they're going to focus on territorial expansion. In fact, generally speaking, for the AP exam, in case you forgot, the structure of the exam, you get to pick one long essay. And your long essays will be from these three things. You'll either have a long essay from Units 1 and 2, one from 3 or 4, or one from 5 and 6. So if you're lost and you don't know how to center your essay, for Units 1 and 2, basically you should talk about territorial expansion. Units 3 and 4, you can talk about territorial expansion or you can talk about trade. And for Units 5 and 6, you should always find a way to talk about industry, imperialism, or science, the rise of modern states. Those are some pretty solid themes. So if you need like a theme to align your essay to, one of those will probably work. All right, territorial expansion in the first, trade and territorial expansion in the second, because that connects to everything. And then you really can't get away from industry and imperialism for Units 5 and 6. So whichever one you like explaining the best, that's probably your favored unit, just as a quick pro tip. Okay, so Persia is engaged in territorial expansion, and what kind of trouble does it get them into? Good. For one, they get into war with the Greeks. Who else do they get into war with? A little bit later after the Greeks. Who else goes in there and actually conquers them?
The Hellenistic Greece under the Macedonians.
Good. Alexander the Great. Which is Hellenistic Greece and Macedonians. Good. So they get into a lot of wars because of territorial expansion too, but they're more than just their interactions with other people. Let's talk about the Persians themselves. What are some things that are unique to Persian culture? If you only study it from the Greek perspective, we're led to believe that the Persians are horrible, evil, land-grabbing Mongols, right? So tell me about the Persians, though, because they're not like that. What's really unique about the Persians in this unit? Nobody else is like this, but the Persians are. Bless you. Good. For one, they have religious tolerance. Good. They're one of the few that are actually monotheistic. Somebody who's not James, can you tell me what their religion was? Yep, Zoro. Good, Zoroastrian. Right, they believe in Zoroastrianism, set about by Zoroaster. The guy really liked his name. Zoroastrianism. It's a precursor to things like Christianity and Islam, right? It believes in the concept of heaven or hell, a final judgment, except you don't go to heaven, you go to the house of song and stuff like that. But it brings up the concepts of good versus evil and that you'll be judged at the end of your lifetime. These are all things that we see in monotheistic faiths now. So it's one of the earlier monotheistic religions. Persia is also religiously tolerant. While they have a state religion, Zoroastrianism, they don't force it on everybody else. How is Persia's government structured? They also were really weird for the time. They had almost like a weird federal style system. Does anybody remember how it was structured? Not a P, but an S, but there's a P in it. You want to play Hangman real fast? Alright, I heard P.
Satraps.
Good, yay, you got it. Satraps. The leader of each satrap would be a satrapy. But basically it was like a federal system. Think of it as a province. Right, Rome had provinces, Persia had satraps. So they would divide it up into 20 or so satraps. Each one was allowed to live exactly as it lived before. Same culture, same language, same religion. It's just instead of paying taxes to your local government, you're going to pay it to the Persian king. Right? And in that way, the Persian king maintained religious tolerance, an empire, which was very successful and rapidly expanding, and everything was fine. There was peace within Persia. Everything was great. Then they get in contact with the Greeks. They wanted to turn Greece into another one of their satraps, their provinces. Surprisingly, they won. They really shouldn't have. There's no good reason why the Greeks should have won that war, but they did. And it actually weakened both powers so that Alexander could eventually take over both. But the Persians were tolerant and monotheistic, and it was very different for the time, something that we hadn't really encountered yet. Tell me about what's going on in India, then. Do we know much? Good. So we have the first two attempts at some sort of centralized government. The first are the Mauryans, and then there are the Gupta. What do you guys remember about either? They came a little bit later than the others, you're right. The Mauryas were around the 300s BCE, so a little bit after Alexander the Great came and did his business, actually. And the Gupta were like 330 CE to 550 CE or something. So they were they were like late stage. Greece is gone by several hundred years, right? We're after the Han dynasty. Han had come and gone before the Gupta come into power. Gupta were super, super late into the game. The only people who were still around were a very failing Roman Empire. This is when Gupta forms, right? So they're around a little bit later. Maurya is unique, though, because for much of Indian history, they are Hindu. But during Maurya, we see somebody Buddhism. We see somebody who encourages Buddhism. Does anybody remember who? Begins with an A. Sansa is from Game of Thrones. Seppuku is ritual suicide in Japan. All right. Oh, wait. I'm doing... Yeah, there you go. See, you ruined our game for everyone. Congratulations. Yes, Ashoka. Right, Ashoka Maurya. Ashoka Maurya, he converts to Buddhism, right, which is a different pattern, because usually, it's still early on, but since, 1500, 1000 BCE, India has been practicing the Vedas, right, Hinduism, and all the things that we learned about Hinduism. So for a guy to come in who agrees with Buddhist philosophy is really interesting. It did not stick, mind you. It's probably a good reason why the Mauryans fell not too much longer after Ashoka's rule. He tries to bring in Buddhism. Buddhism itself comes from this region of India, right? A northeastern prince decides that he's unhappy with his Hindu life and he wants to seek enlightenment. He follows the Four Noble Truths. He decides that the only way forward is to end suffering, right? Follow the Eightfold Path and you will be able to ascend. And Buddhism, which began as a philosophy, is spread very efficiently over the Silk Roads to East Asia. So Ashoka converts to Buddhism, but unfortunately it doesn't stick so well. It kind of remains just a philosophy in India, whereas Hinduism remains the majority religion. So they come and go. Tell me about the Gupta. How might we categorize the Gupta in Indian history? Because the Mauryas were the ones that built the most land. You may remember that the Mauryans had the Mauryans had all of this. But the Gupta, they had more or less. They had less, right? They really didn't take over that much land. Why? What were they focused on? This reminds me a bit of the Umayyads versus the Abbasids. They were not focused on territorial expansion, they were focused on, yes, religious, cultural. What might we call that? Where you're experiencing prosperity and your culture is awesome and the economy is pretty good. A golden age. Good. So what we see with the Gupta, that's where we consider a lot of golden age India. Whereas Maurya is more about territorial expansion and they're trying to figure it out and they're trying to centralize their power because India is very decentralized. You don't need a strong central government to have a practicing Hindu caste system. Because people are doing what they have to do to reach enlightenment, right, to achieve moksha. So they're not really listening to the government as much early on. You can still have a functioning government and it's decentralized. So early India always had a problem with centralization. So the Gupta don't really focus as much on territorial expansion. Instead, they focus on culture, religion, that kind of stuff. And this is more or less what's going on. So just to recap time really fast. Persians came first, right? They existed from about 550 CE with Cyrus the Great, when he created the Persian Empire, up until about, 330s, when they were conquered by Alexander the Great. this is about the time that we see the Mauryans pop up. I think, if I remember our timeline correctly, the Persians ended, and then on another line, the Mauryans almost begin. Like, the Mauryans come into power just as Alexander the Great was on the border of India. He didn't actually get into India. He was right on the border of the Indus River, and his troops are like, nah, we're not going any further, and he was killed. Right? So the Mauryans come about after that, around like the 330s, until not long, the 200-somethings. And then the Gupta, if I remember correctly, is 330 CE to 550. Who knocked out the Gupta, by the way? Yeah, like who conquered the Gupta? The White Huns. Good. The White Huns are an offshoot of the Huns. They also knocked out Han China and Rome. Right. So if you remember, we don't really have a moment in the sun in our review for the Central Asians, but we've got the Huns basically hanging out here. And they go down, they knock out China, and they go down, they knock out India, and they go over here and knock out Rome also. So the Huns are getting around. This is not the first time we will see a nomadic group from Central Asia rising and taking power and conquering everybody in their path, right? Of course, the Mongols do that about 1,000 years later. But still kind of cool. So that's what's going on in Unit 2. We see the rise of centralized empires in India. We see a strong centralized empire in the Middle East. So right off the bat, we're seeing centralization, territorial expansion. So tell me about how things change for Unit 3, then. What kind of huge world-changing events happen in the Middle East in Unit 3? Good. This is the birth of Islam. Oh my goodness, I've done something. All right, we're good. So this is the birth of Islam. That's not where Mecca is. The thing moved. Ruining everything. So this is where we see the birth of Islam. I'm not going to review it, but it's built on the 5 pillars. It was created by Muhammad, who had a vision from the angel Gabriel that he was the last prophet of God, that he had the final word, and that everything that came before it was not the final word. He is bringing the final word, right? But all the prophets, all the angels, Jesus himself, all of them have a role to play in Islam. It's just Islam is the final version, right? So he goes on this quest to spread Islam, and it becomes immensely successful. Where are some places where Islam spreads during Unit 3? Unit 3, by the way, is 600 to 1450. Good. So it spreads all throughout the Middle East, all the way over here. Yep, it spreads to Egypt. Where else, Selma?
Like different parts of Africa.
Oh, yeah. Basically all of this. How far does it go?
South Spain.
Yeah, it goes into Spain. Do you remember when we talked about Europe briefly? This is Charles the Hammer Martel. 792, Battle of Tours, right? This is where he encounters Islam. Remember we talked about the Franks? Not China and Russia, but it does go somewhere in Asia.
India.
Delhi Caliphate.
Good. It goes to India with a caliphate known as the Delhi Caliphate, so it's the first Muslim ruling group in India. But where else does it go from there? The Balkans a little bit later. That's as a result of the Crusades. It goes to Indonesia down here. Yep, it does spread down here into Mali and all that. Indonesia, right, it goes down there. Do you remember Malacca, Straits of Malacca, right, Srivijaya, which falls and gives rise to Muslim merchant empires down there. So as we can see, Islam is immensely successful in how it spreads. It spreads mostly peacefully. People wanted to convert to Islam because there were economic benefits. And there were social benefits too. For example, Islam preached equality, that everybody was equal under the eyes of Allah. Whereas in religions like Hinduism, you're anything but equal. It's a system built on inequalities. And so a lot of people were very enamored with the idea of a religion that could promise absolution while also giving equality in the now. Right, so a lot of people converted to Islam because of that. And so it spread very peacefully, in most cases peacefully, sometimes forcefully, across North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. However, Islam does experience a split more or less immediately after the death of Muhammad, right? Those who believed that the Ummah, the followers of Muhammad, those who were with him from the beginning, that they should become the next caliphate, the next political and religious leader, who did they become? Sunni. Okay, those who wanted the followers. became the Sunni. They today represent more or less 85% of Muslims around the world. The other 15% goes to the Shia, right? They believed that the next caliph should have been Ali, his family, that it should have stayed blood relatives, right? Whereas the Sunni believed that anybody who was loyal to the cause could be the next caliphate. The Shia believed it should have only been family. They also believed much more in Sharia law, right? The strong Sharia law. And so what we see is a breakdown between Sunni and Shia. And if we look at the Middle East, generally speaking, the Shia are here, and the Sunni are everywhere else. Not 100%. This is just a general trend. So that there's really only a Shia majority here, ironically enough. So this is the heartland of the old Persian Empire. And this is later going to become Iran, which has established itself as being very different in the Middle East, right? Probably because they are a Shia majority, and every other country around them that is Muslim is a Sunni majority country. So they've always kind of been on the defense there. What are the two empires, I should say caliphates, in order that are born from this period? Good. First we have the Umayyads. They form like, I don't even know. I'm just going to say the death of Muhammad. They form right away. When are they conquered by the Abbasids? It's a nice round number. No, not that way. And by round, I mean it ends in a 0. It's not like to the 100th. Does anybody remember? 750. And then the Abbasids are 750 until 1258 when they were conquered by the Mongols. So the Umayyads are around for a long time. Are they more focused on territorial expansion or culture? Expansion first. You can't sit down and be all happy with your lands and start building culture in a golden age until you actually had the lands to begin with, right? So the Umayyads are more focused on territorial expansions. And like the Maurya and the Gupta, the Maurya and the Umayyads were the first to come. They focused on territorial expansion, and they had more lands. The Gupta and the Abbasids come later. They have less land, and they are instead focused on culture. This is when we see great Persian literature and texts come out of the Abbasids, like 1001 Arabian Nights, which is where we get Aladdin. That's classic Persian text. That comes from Abbasid period of time, which is kind of cool. Right, so the foundation of like Persian literature and art and all of these things, that comes during the Abbasid period of time, whereas the Umayyads were more responsible for territorial expansion. What's going on in India in this period of time? One of you guys mentioned it quickly. Good. We didn't talk about it as much in class, but with the spread of Islam, it also brings Islam into India. In India, we see for the first time a Muslim ruling caliphate there, the Delhi Sultanate, of which the leader is a sultan. Right? A sultan rules the sultanate. That stays in power until they crumble and are eventually taken over by the Mughals. We'll come a little bit later. So that's Unit 3. We have to mention, we can't only mention it during our China week, what is the trade network that allows all of this to happen? The Silk Roads, right? The Silk Roads begin over... Oh my goodness, stop. Stop. I'm ruining everything. What have I done? Whatever. The Silk Roads begin over here in Chang'an. And they end over here in Rome. But in the meantime, they connect everything else. So there's a desert right here. Just trying to draw the hazards. There's a desert right here. Does everybody know the name of the desert I'm scribbling right now? Good, that's the Gobi Desert. I wouldn't expect you to remember the other one, but that's the Taklamakan Desert. And then we've got a bunch of mountain ranges here. So this is what we have to contend with. So the Silk Roads kind of go around it. And they go through the sea, and they go down to the Middle East, and they go down into India. There's the Khyber Pass right here that allows you to get through it. So some of them would go through here. So, and then it connects to the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. So we do see the rise. Oh, and sorry, there's also a sea-based one. So we do see the emergence of trade networks happening in this period of time, primarily the Silk Roads. Later on, we're also going to see Indian Ocean trade, right? So we start to see mostly land-based travel going back and forth. It cements power for China. It allows India to trade on the world scene in a way they weren't really doing in Units 1 and 2, and it brings information and exotic stuff to Rome. Although at that point Rome had fallen, it was the Byzantine Empire, but they considered themselves Roman. So the Silk Roads is really what enabled the spread of Islam. It also allows the spread of what other religions? Buddhism, for sure, and one more, but to a much lesser extent. You're not wrong. Christianity spread also. Christianity ends up in settlements over here, particularly here. Sorry, the arrow hasn't showed up on the board yet. There you go. In the old Caucasus region. That's where Armenia is, and Azerbaijan, and Georgia, and there happen to be pockets of Christians there also. Oftentimes they're called the Nestorian Christians. Those populations are often targeted in the Middle East because they're one of the few Christian populations there. But there's another religion, it's an Indian religion that spread also. Hinduism, yeah. It spread to a much lesser extent, but we do see the spread of Hinduism throughout India and then some small areas within Southeast Asia. But Buddhism is much more successful at it, as is Islam, so we don't notice it as much. But a lot of religion spread on this, culture spreads on this, language spreads on this, goods, services, money, Mansa Musa, quite literally throwing money, right? So the Silk Roads allowed for the spread of these cultures, and we start to see, I wouldn't necessarily see syncretism happening yet, the merging of cultures, not like what we saw with Hellenism, but we see an exchange of ideas. This is all going on. Meanwhile, Europe's just kind of hanging out back here, being all backwards and not trading with each other because of the manor system. They're doing their thing. They're not really engaging in trade. And then, of course, my friend the Black Death also starts to spread and eventually gets his way to Europe. But anyway, that's the story that we've already told. We don't have much time left, but let's at least take a quick stock of what's going on in Unit 4 for the Middle East and for, well, all of it, really. This is when we start to see that this makes the same chapter. 3 different empires form. Good. We call them collectively the gunpowder empires. They are able to use, thanks to the Silk Roads, gunpowder to build and expand their territories in ways they were not able to do so before. Who is over there in the old Persian Empire close to Europe? Good. Over here we've got the Ottomans. Who's sandwiched in the middle? They are the one who are Shia on the old heartland of the Persian Empire. Safavids. Good. They're the only one who are Shia. And they're sandwiched on the other side by the... No, not the Abbasids, the Mughals. That's all right. Going backwards in time. These are the gunpowder empires. The Safavids were always kind of the odd man out because, one, they were sandwiched between the other two. They were the only ones who were Shia. The other two were Sunni. And they constantly fought. They fought against the Ottomans and lost a battle there, the Battle of Chaldiran. They fought against the Mughals, and the Mughals destroyed them too. So the Safavids kind of kept to themselves and were considered different. One of the great things of the Safavids, though, is that they had much of the Central Asian Silk Road trade networks, and so they still engaged in land-based trade. But this is when we start to see the Ottomans and the Mughals instead engaging in ocean-based trade, with newcomers to the party, the Europeans. Right? The Mughals made so much money off of selling their goods to the Europeans. They had so much silver that they were able to build monumental architecture like the Taj Mahal. Right? They had so much silver. They were just dripping in it. So much so that the Britain took notice and went in there and took the land, right, in Unit 5. The Ottomans, who had up to this point been growing and growing and growing, have become this really large civilization. They take Constantinople in 1453. They're this massive empire. They stand as like this constant rival to the West, and they're growing, and they don't realistically end until World War I, right? So they're a really large power also. So what we start to notice in the Middle East is this continuation of empires. They are strong, militaristic, centralized, and territorially expanding empires, and they do a lot of that because of their connections on the Silk Roads. Things change, however, in Unit 5, because the Europeans are starting to that's not how they would have sailed, but you'll get the idea. The Europeans are starting to get all up in everybody's business. So how do things change, particularly for India, between 1750 and 1900? Who's they?
The Indians.
Yes, the British take over from which Indian empire? The Mughals, right. So the Mughals are there, and the British start coming in. They start on the coasts over here in Calcutta, and then over here in the Bengal province, and then slowly they start working their way into the country until, I would say, by the early 1800s, they have a good chunk of India under their control. All right, so this is where we start to see the imperialism of the Middle East and India. We see imperialism by the British, and we start to see imperialism in the Middle East also by the British, the French, and the Ottomans who are fighting them. But by the end of this time period, the Middle East really is carved up. And I know I'm flying, but I really want to talk about more modern-day Middle East issues. One of the things that popped up as a result of imperialism and decolonization is the Israel-Palestine conflict. After the Holocaust, we send Israelis to Palestine and tell them that we're going to give them land. Right? This causes a religious tension between the Palestinians who had been living there for generations and the Israelis who wanted the conflict. And as a result, when we look at it today, the Israelis have taken over much of the land and deny rights and citizenship to the Palestinians. We created that conflict due to imperialism. Another thing that we see happening today is Iran, which is a majority Shia country. They have taken on a very anti-Western stance. In fact, other anti-Western people, I was just reading this in my Latin American Studies class this morning, other anti-Western countries allied themselves with Iran. Russia, interestingly enough, Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, when he was still alive, he used to ally himself and meet with the Iranians quite often. Because like Iran, Venezuela hated the United States, and any chance he got to go out on the stage and ally with people who were anti-United States, he's like, we're friends. Fidel Castro, I forget his name, of Iran for the 80s. Who else? Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. Anybody who was anti-United States, they'd be friends. So Iran became like this reaction against Western, against capitalization power, which is really interesting. And they remain that way today, almost as a theocracy where they have an Ayatollah who is in control. It's a very religiously run government. We don't get on with them whatsoever. What else is going on? In India, we see decolonization. Does anyone remember about when? Can you tell me after? What?
After World War II.
Good, it's after World War II. It's 1947. As long as you can remember it's after World War II, then you're good to go. Where they were granted independence by the British, it's when we see a separation for the first time between India and Pakistan. This used to be called East Pakistan, but is now Bangladesh. But we see a separation, religiously, between Pakistan and India among Hindu and religious lines. Right? So even though we kind of rush through it, what we notice happening after the Europeans start to grow in power and take command of the trade networks is that other places in the globe are told to relinquish their empires, and they either become colonies or they become enemies of the West, as in the case of, let's say, India versus Iran. All right? And what we look at today with the Middle East is a lot of Western intervention, which is very unfortunate. I guess they're putting the bells back on. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at East Asia, China mostly, and a bit of Japan.